What comes to mind when you think of a haunting? The flickering of lights and cold spots? Perhaps the sound of footsteps where no one should be? Creaky old houses with shutters falling off and peeling paint? Where doors open and close without hands to guide them? A child's laughter from an empty room, the sound of someone crying through walls too thin to keep secrets. The way a room feels when someone leaves but doesn't come back. But some hauntings are far more than that. Sometimes hauntings are about more than what's been buried in the earth.
Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path.
There are things that follow us in life, not in the way that shadows do, tethered to light and movement. We talk about ghosts like they are the remnants of dead, but that's not always the case. Some ghosts are born of grief, from guilt, from the kind of pain that digs its talons so deep that even death doesn't end the hurt. Sometimes trauma doesn't fade, but rather it becomes distorted in echoes, caught between the veil of the living and the dead. Sometimes it's so immense that it finds new ways to speak. And sometimes when the lights go out and the house goes quiet, it speaks in the language of hauntings. Trauma doesn't just live in memory. It stains the ground. It seeps into the drywall and soil, into the grain of the floorboards and the rusted hinges of cellar doors. In psychology, they call it emotional residue, psychic imprinting. The way a violent moment leaves behind more than blood and broken things. You can bury the bodies, scrub the walls, replace the carpet, even knock the whole place down and build something new, but that won't matter. The imprint remains. You could sleep in bed and dream someone else's nightmare. You can still feel the darkness enter a room with you and tighten underneath your skin. Sometimes a haunting is the fear, the pain, that final devastating moment soaked up in time. There are towns that are built on old wounds, schoolrooms no one wants to use, forests that feel too eerily like someone is watching you. When the trauma is intense enough, it leaves behind ricochets in the land itself. The theory goes that extremely emotional events don't just affect the people who experience them, but they can alter the environment. The physical space becomes kind of a witness, absorbing the emotional charge like a battery. Studies in environmental psychology suggest that architecture can influence emotions. Certain shapes, colors, and spatial arrangements can trigger unease or calm. But when trauma imprints on these spaces, it overrides design. A well-lit hallway can still feel claustrophobic, or a freshly painted room can still smell sour. Because those responses are tied to an event, to the intensity of it, and slowly but surely, it becomes a part of the location's identity. This is why some locations develop reputations. Psychologists call it imprinting, paranormal investigators call it residual energy. Locals call it cursed or wrong. But whatever name it's given, the place begins to behave like a wound that's never healed. An imprint doesn't need belief to be activated. It doesn't rely on coincidence. It waits for the right conditions, the right person, the right moment. And when those conditions align, a reenactment starts. These locations are places that were once sites of violence, depression, or abandonment. Old hospitals where the walls absorb decades of suffering and death. Decommissioned prisons where the air still feels like punishment. Asylums, orphanages, battlefields, motels with too many locked doors and not enough explanations. Even ordinary places like suburban homes, roadside diners, or school hallways can become saturated if the trauma is sharp enough, repeated enough, unresolved enough. Although in some cases the architecture helps the ambiance of creepy, what really makes a place truly feel haunted is when that place is forced to witness trauma. Visitors to these types of locations often describe kind of an atmospheric pressure, almost like a psychological response, such as a tightness in the chest, nausea, headaches, sudden fatigue. Others may report auditory distortions, such as whispers, disembodied footsteps, distant crying. Others may feel watched when alone. In some cases, the imprint is so strong that it overrides logic. A person can feel so overwhelmed by grief they don't understand that they start crying in rooms that have no connection to them personally. They may dream of events that they've never even heard about. In his essay, The Place of Trauma, Memories, Hauntings, and the Temporality of Ruins, philosopher Dylan Tigg explores how traumatic events can impact the physical space, particularly through the lens of ruins. He argues that ruins are not passive remnants of the past, but active witnesses, structures that have absorbed trauma and now serve as sites where trauma can tremble into visibility. Trigg suggests that when we encounter these ruins, we're not just looking at decay, we're engaging with the space that forgoes closure, ones that refuse to settle into neat historical narratives. Central to Trigg's argument is the idea that trauma imprints itself on places, and that ruins disrupt linear time. Rather than offering a clear before and after, they create what he calls a logic of hauntings and voids. The ruin becomes a temporal fracture, where memory doesn't behave predictably. It loops, fragments, and then resurfaces. Trigg draws on phenomenology, the study of lived experience, to explain how we feel about places, especially those marked by trauma. He is less concerned with how ruins look and more focused on how they affect us psychologically. A ruin can feel uncanny, melancholic, and even hostile, depending on what the earth or walls bore witness to. The environment holds on to that energy it left behind, and when we walk into said environment, we start to participate with that energy. The ruin or place becomes a medium, though the trauma is not remembered, but it's re-experienced. This framework helps explain why certain places evoke such strong reactions. It's not superstition or suggestion. It's the psychological weight a space has absorbed during suffering. His work invites us to consider that these spaces are not dead places, but they are emotionally active landscapes. Auschwitz is a place where the architecture itself seems to recoil. Visitors have reported a visceral response, nausea, dizziness, the sense of being watched. The silence here isn't peaceful. It's oppressive, almost sentient. The trauma of systemic extermination has settled into the soil, the bricks, even the air. Hiroshima carries a similar weight. The Peace Memorial Park is serene, but the quiet here feels loaded. The Genbake Dome stands as a skeletal reminder of the emotional impact, the trauma of sudden annihilation, of lives vaporized in an instant, left behind more than just rubble. Gettysburg offers a different kind of imprint. The battlefield is open, pastoral, almost beautiful. But the ground doesn't feel empty, it feels saturated. The trauma here wasn't sudden. It was prolonged, chaotic, and intimate. Thousands died within sight of each other, within earshot of final words. The landscape absorbed it all. And now, more than a century later, visitors still report strange sounds, apparitions, sensations of being pulled off course. Perhaps the ghost stories that circulate aren't just folklore. They're expressions of a place that refuses to forget. At one point, the woman had wandered too far into the rocks, the kind that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The sun was high, but the shadows in Devil's Den didn't seem to care. They pooled in the crevices, thick and unmoving, and the woman's voice, when she called out, was swallowed whole. She didn't know how long she'd been circling the boulders trying to retrace her steps. Her phone had died without warning. The camera had glitched earlier, refocusing, then freezing altogether. She hadn't thought much of it until now. And that's when the man appeared without a sound. He was barefoot, clothes hanging loose, his hat slouched low over his brow. His face was sun-darkened and his beard patchy, his eyes almost unreadable. He didn't smile, but he didn't frighten her either. He raised one arm and pointed towards a narrow gap between the rocks. "What you're looking for is over there," he said, his voice dry like leaves crushed underfoot. She turned to look where he gestured, and when she turned back around, he was gone. Later, she tells the park rangers, describing the man in detail. The park rangers don't laugh at her. Instead, they ask her questions. When she mentions the hat and the bare feet, one of the rangers nods slowly. "That's not the first time he's appeared," he says. The man she saw matches the figure in one of the most famous Civil War photos taken at Devil's Den, a Confederate soldier deceased beside his rifle. He's wearing no shoes. Some say that scavengers took them, others say he never had any to begin with. Visitors to Gettysburg speak of encountering this man often. His spirit is known to offer help, directions, and advice, sometimes to even take a photo. But when they check their cameras, he's not there. The photo is blank or the file is corrupted. Paranormal investigators bring backup cameras, batteries, and for sensors, but none of it matters. The locals call it the camera curse. Tourists may lose entire memory cards, batteries drain in seconds, and lenses can fog without cause. Legend goes that at Devil's Den in July of 1863, Alexander Gardner arrived with his camera. The battle was over, but the dead hadn't been buried yet. Gardner had worked under Matthew Brad, the war's most famous documentarian, but by then he'd broken off, chasing his own vision of what the war looked like. Among some boulders, Gardner and his team found the Confederate corpse, and they moved him. They dragged his body to a narrow crevice where they used the rocks to frame the scene. They propped up a rifle beside him, not a sharpshooter's weapon, just the standard infantry model, and shot the frame. The photograph was titled "Home of a Rebel Sharpshooter" and was published soon after. But the same body appeared in other photos, in other locations of the war. Not always with a rifle, sometimes it was surrounded by debris and fragments of combat. It would appear as though Gardner had used the corpse to stage several photos. Was it journalism, propaganda, art? Gardner never did say. Some believe that the spirit of the soldier never forgave the staging, and now he lingers in Devil's Den, barefoot and watchful, disrupting cameras and draining batteries in a refusal to be photographed again. The town once sat quiet in the valley, tucked between low hills and winding roads that hadn't yet been widened for anything faster than a horse. Gettysburg was the kind of place where the shutters stayed open late into the evening and the smell of bread drifted from kitchen windows like it had somewhere to be. There were orchards just beyond the edge of town, thick with apples in the fall, and the kind of silence that made you forget that the world had corners. The tavern on Schaumburg Street served cider that tasted like it remembered the tree it came from. The college stood proud on the hill, its stone facade catching the morning sun like it was built to hold it. Church bells sang every Sunday, and the people here moved slowly. By the morning of July 1st, 1863, Gettysburg had begun to change. The 1st Union Cavalry arrived from the north, skirmishing with Confederate forces pushing in from the west. The town's streets, once filled with the sound of wagons and laughter, now echoed with gunfire and shouted orders. Civilians watched from windows as soldiers bled into the gutter. By nightfall, the dead were already piling up. The next day, the fighting moved south. Devil's Den, the wheat field, the peach orchard. Names that would later become synonymous with slaughter. The air thickened with smoke and the stench of powder. Men screamed for water, for medics, for their mothers. The wounded crawled through the grass, dragging their shattered limbs behind them. Artillery fire shook the ground, sending splinters of rock and bone into the air. Trees were stripped bare by musket balls. Horses died screaming, their bodies left to rot where they fell. At Devil's Den, the rocks turned slick with blood. Confederate sharpshooters took positions among the boulders, firing into the Union lines with precision. The Union troops charged the hill 3 times before they took it, stepping over their own dead to reach the summit. The ground was so littered with bodies that soldiers couldn't walk without stepping on someone. Some lay face down, others stared blankly at the sky, mouths open, eyes clouded. The heat swelled and the corpses began to bloat, blackening under the July sun, splitting in the open fields. By July 3rd, the town itself had become a hospital. Churches, homes, even barns were filled with the wounded. Amputations were performed on kitchen tables, blood soaked into floorboards. Surgeons worked without rest, their hands blistering and blackened from tools. Limbs were tossed into piles outside, where flies gathered in clouds. The smell was unbearable. Civilians gagged behind handkerchiefs, but there was nowhere else to go. Burial crews arrived with rags tied around their faces, soaked in peppermint oil to keep the rot from crawling up their throats. They gagged anyways. Some vomited into the grass, and they kept digging. The graves were shallow. There weren't enough shovels and the ground was hard. Names didn't matter. They buried men in piles, Union and Confederate together, stripped of gear, stripped of dignity. Limbs were missing. Faces were unrecognizable. They buried what they could and left the rest. Soon after, the rain came and undid all of the work. It washed through the trenches, turning the soil into slurry, exposing arms, boots, half a face staring up from the muck. Children found bones in their yards. Dogs dragged rib cages into the streets. A skull rolled into a garden bed and stayed there until someone buried it again. The orchard trees dropped fruits that no one picked. The tavern closed. The college empty. And the church bells rang for the dead. The battle had lasted 3 days. It left behind more than 51,000 casualties, dead, wounded, captured, or missing. That number swallowed the town whole. It was the highest toll of any battle in the American Civil War. Over 8,000 men died outright, their bodies laid in fields, in orchards, in the creek beds. Some were found days later curled into ditches, faces eaten by insects, uniforms stiff with blood. Another 33,000 were wounded, many beyond saving. More than 10,000 were listed as missing or captured. Some had fled into the woods and died alone. Others were taken prisoner, dragged south and never seen again. Families waited for letters that would never come, and graves were dug without names. Markers were made from broken fence posts and scraps of tin. The town's population had been around 2,400 before the battle, and afterwards it hosted tens of thousands of wounded and dying men. Every building became a hospital, every yard a triage, every porch a place to bleed. Now, the town holds restless souls, the ones who died screaming, crawling, begging, dragged from creek beds and posed for photographers. Their suffering didn't end with the war, it was stretched into the present day, and visitors feel it in their bones. A pressure, a weight, a wrongness. Gettysburg doesn't just remember, it reacts, and it forces the living to bear witness. Jeannie Wade was 23-year-old, a seamstress, quiet and dutiful. She had come to her sister's house on Baltimore Street to help with the newborn, bake bread for the Union soldiers, and to keep the home steady while the world outside unraveled. The house was modest, brick-faced, a small kitchen where the light came in soft through the windows. And on the morning of July 3rd, she was kneading dough at the table when a bullet came. The house on Baltimore Street had already taken hits. It had shattered windows and cracked plaster. The sharp whistle of a musket ball slicing past. This bullet tore through the front door, splintered the wood, and passed through the parlor, punching through the second door without slowing, and struck Jeannie in the back. The force drove her forward, her body folding over the table, dough still clinging to her fingers. The blood soaked through the front of her dress as she collapsed, lifeless before her mother could reach her. Georgia, her sister, screamed and clutched her child as the walls shook from another volley outside. The smell of gunpowder crept through the broken windows. By the end of the day, more than 150 bullets had struck the house. An artillery shell crashed through the roof and embedded itself in the floorboards, its fuse unlit, but its casing still warm. The rooms were riddled with holes and the furniture was splintered. The walls bled dust, and Jeannie Wade, 23 years old, became the only civilian killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. Her death wasn't heroic or cinematic. It was sudden, brutal, and unrelenting. Just one more casualty in a town that had already begun to drown in blood. The Jeannie Wade house is a museum now, but it doesn't behave like one. It creaks when it shouldn't. It chills when the air outside is warm. People say that Jeannie never left. Her figure has been seen walking the hallway, usually near the kitchen, but sometimes just beyond the threshold of a room, as if waiting for someone to call her back. She wears a long dress and her hair is pinned. Her face is soft but distant, like she's still listening for the sound of cannon fire. The scent of bread follows her, warm, yeasty, impossible. It drifts through the house without warning, clinging to the corners and then fading before anyone can find the source. Children move through the second floor, though none live there. Visitors feel small hands clutching at their legs. They hear giggles that don't belong to anyone in their tour groups. Cold drafts slip through the staircase. Shadows dart across the walls. And some say the spirits come from the cemetery next door. But others believe they're tied to Jeannie's grief, to the infant that she came to protect, to the life interrupted mid-step. Paranormal teams bring equipment, recorders, sensors, cameras. They leave with whispers. Jeannie's name, soft cries, pleas for help, footsteps echo through empty rooms, and doors open without being touched. There are voices that speak, though there's no one to answer. The house responds, although not always kindly. Photographs taken inside the house show things that shouldn't be there. Orbs, mist, light that bends wrong. Some frames come out blank, others show distortion that twists the air. Batteries die without warning, devices freeze, and the house resists being captured. It prefers to be felt. The kitchen is the worst of it. People walk in and stop short, overcome by grief that isn't theirs. The temperature drops and the silence deepens. It's as if something is watching and waiting. Psychics speak of Jeannie's fiancé, Jack Skelly, who died without knowing she was already gone. His presence is said to linger nearby, drawn to the place where her life ended, and together they form kind of an echo, a loop, because sorrow doesn't fade. Jeannie Wade House doesn't just remember, it relives, and it makes sure that you do too. Just a few blocks north, the Gettysburg Hotel rises from Lincoln Square like it's always been there. Its facade polished, its lobby warm, its history buried just deep enough to keep the screams from reaching the surface. The building has changed names, hands, and shape, but the bones remain. It started off as Scott's Tavern in 1797, then became the Little Indian Queen, then the McCullen House by the mid-1800s. The walls have seen presidents, parades, and quiet winters, but it's what happened in July of 1863 that left the deepest scars. When the battle tore through Gettysburg, the hotel became a field hospital, the ballroom filled with the wounded. Guest rooms opened into operating tables and stations. Blood soaked the floorboards and stayed there. Men died in agony, screaming for water. Some whispered prayers. Some said nothing at all. The air thickened with rot and chloroform. Surgeons worked by candlelight, their hands slick, their aprons stiff with gore. After the fire in 1983, the hotel was rebuilt, restored, and then reopened in 1991 as part of the Historical Hotels of America. The walls were cleaned and the floors had been polished, but the past never left. Rachel is one of the most talked about figures. She's a nurse that moves through the halls like she's still on shift. Guests will wake to find their drawers open, bags rifled through, and personal items moved from one side of the room to the other. They hear wheels squeaking down the corridor, metal on wood, slow and steady, as if she's pushing carts that no longer exist. Cold drafts follow her. So does the feeling of being watched, but it's not threatening. Her energy isn't cruel, it's focused. She's still working. She's still tending to the injured, still trying to save ones who couldn't be saved. Rachel isn't the only one who stayed behind. There's another figure who moves through the Gettysburg Hotel, one not so gentle. Guests have seen him pacing the corridors, boots striking the floor with a rhythm that doesn't match the living. He wears a Union uniform, faded and torn, the buttons dulled, and the fabric stiff with something darker than age. His name is believed to be James Culberson, a soldier from the Company K of the Pennsylvania Reserves. He was brought here in July of 1863, bleeding badly, his body broken, but his mind still locked in on the battlefield. Some say that he begged to return, pleaded with surgeons, with the nurses, with anyone who would listen. He wanted to fight. He wanted to finish what he started, but the wounds were too deep. He died within hours, his final words tangled in duty and desperation. And now he walks the halls like he's still waiting for orders. Guests hear murmurs, fragments of speech, half-formed commands, whispers about readiness. Some see him clearly. His figure is pale and rigid with a gaping wound in his torso that never stops bleeding. Others only catch a flicker of movement, the sudden drop in temperature, and the lights dimming without cause. He never speaks to anyone. He doesn't ask for help. He just walks over and over, room to room, hall to hall, as if the war never ended and he's still needed, as if he's still dying. Culbertson walks the halls like a man still waiting for orders, but downstairs in the ballroom, another figure appears, graceful, deliberate, and entirely out of place. She wears a Civil War-era dress, the fabric flowing as she turns, her feet gliding across the polished floors to music no one else can hear. There's no orchestra, there's no piano, it's just silence and her. She dances alone at first, her movements slow, almost mournful. Then others appear. Phantom soldiers, rigid and watchful, lining the edges of the room like they've been summoned to witness something sacred. They don't speak. They don't move. They just stand as she sways, caught in the rhythm that doesn't belong to this century. Her presence isn't frightening, it's unsettling. the air shifts around her thick with longing, as if she's still reliving the moment that never came to pass. A celebration interrupted, a promise unfulfilled. Upstairs, the 3rd and 4th floors carry the weight of everything the ballroom tries to forget. These levels are where the energy sharpens, where the walls seem to breathe, where footsteps echo long after the halls have emptied. Late at night, guests report doors opening on their own, lights flickering without cause, voices whispering from behind locked doors. Cold spots bloom in the corners of rooms, and shadows stretch across the ceiling. Some wake to find figures standing at the foot of their beds, watching, waiting, silent. The hotel may have been rebuilt, but the upper floors never let go. They hold on to echoes tight. They replay the pain. They make sure that no one sleeps easy, just as they don't. The Gettysburg Hotel holds its ghost close, but Saks Covered Bridge wears them like second skin. Just west of town, stretching over the slow-moving waters of Marsh Creek, the bridge stands quiet and intact, its 100-foot wooden frame weathered but unbroken. Built in 1852 by David S. Stoner, its town lattice truss design was meant to connect farmland to the town center, a simple passage for wagons and foot traffic. But in July of 1863, it became something else. Union and Confederate troops crossed it under fire, boots thudding against the planks, horses screaming, the air thick with smoke and desperation. On July 3rd, as Confederate forces retreated, Saks Bridge became the final crossing, a place soaked in defeat. Legend tells of 3 Confederate soldiers that tried to flee the carnage, disguised in Union blue. Whether they were deserters or spies depends on who's telling the story, but what doesn't change is how it ended. They were caught, and they were hanged from the beams of the bridge, their bodies left there as a warning. No official record confirms this. There are no names or dates, just a story passed down and reinforced by what people still see. Visitors speak of shadowy figures pacing the bridge in Confederate uniforms, their outline flickering in the mist. Some vanish when approached. Others linger and watch you. A few claim to see heads disembodied floating just above the ground, drifting through the dark like they're still searching for the rest of themselves. There is the scent of cigar smoke that drifts through the air, sharp and sudden, especially after sunset. No one is smoking. The smell fades as quickly as it arrives. Some believe it belongs to an officer, one who patrols the bridge during the retreat, and one who never stopped. People feel touches. Light taps on their shoulder, brushes against the arm, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Some describe pressure around the neck, tight and unrelenting, as if it's the past trying to react itself. Footsteps echo behind them, matching their pace, stopping when they stop, starting when they start again, and when they turn around, no one is there. There are lanterns that swing in the darkness, suspended from nothing, moving with a rhythm that doesn't belong to the wind. The bridge doesn't speak, but it doesn't need to. It shows you what it remembers. The lantern at Saks Bridge swing in the darkness, and the footsteps vanish into the mist. But if you follow the road east, past the fields still marked by cannon scars, you'll reach a place where the silence doesn't mean peace. The Gettysburg National Cemetery sits on a rise just beyond town. Its rows of white headstones aligned with military precision, stretching like ribs across the hillside. It was carved into the earth in the aftermath of the battle, a desperate act of order in the face of chaos. Over 3,500 Union soldiers were buried here, their names etched in stone, except for 979 who remained unknown. Their stories are lost, but their presence is anything but absent. This is where President Abraham Lincoln stood on November 19, 1863, and spoke words that would echo through centuries. The Gettysburg Address reframed the war not as a clash of armies, but as a reckoning for the soul of a fractured nation. The speech lasted barely 2 minutes. The grief it addressed, though, has lasted far longer. But beneath that solemnity lies something stranger. The cemetery is quiet, yes, but not still. As dusk settles over the Gettysburg National Cemetery, the rows of headstones seem to shift into the fading light. Visitors speak in hushed tones, not out of reverence, but instinct. Something is watching them among the graves. Shadowy figures have been seen standing motionless, soldiers in uniforms, their outlines crisp against the mist. Some salute, others just simply observe, and then they vanish when approached, leaving behind a silence that feels deliberate, but not empty, just paused. The Soldiers' National Monument, the air carries sound that shouldn't be there, like bugle calls drifting through trees, taps, revile, played by no one. The notes are faint, but they're unmistakable. There is marching footsteps that follow the rhythm, boots striking the earth with military precision. Guests have turned to find no one standing behind them. The cadence stopped mid-step, as if the parade just ended, just out of sight. The atmosphere here shifts without warning. Warm days can turn cold within seconds. Breezes die and the air thickens, especially near the graves of the unknown, where the names were lost but grief remains. Sensitive visitors report feeling sudden waves of emotion, grief, confusion, longing. Some cry out without knowing why, and others feel pulled towards certain stones, almost as if they're being summoned. The cemetery doesn't speak in words, it speaks in weight. There are 979 unknown soldiers buried here, with no rank and no hometown. Their graves are small, simpler, but the energy around them is loud. Paranormal investigators have recorded EVPs near these sites, soft, fractured whispers saying things like, "Who am I?" or "Tell her I'm here." The voices don't plead, they reach. There are some who say that these spirits are drawn to the living, hoping for recognition, for memory, for something that feels like home. Near the site where Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, visitors have reported seeing a tall figure in a black coat and stovepipe hat, standing on the edge of the cemetery, unmoving and silent. Whether it's residual energy or a symbolic echo or something more, the emotional gratitude of Lincoln's words seem to have left a permanent imprint. Mediums describe the space as layered peace, pressed thin over anguish. The sorrow here isn't sharp, it's deeper than that, and it rolls in waves. Some sensitives report visions of battlefield scenes bleeding into the cemetery ground, with flashes of cannon fire and cries from the wounded. The chaos of retreat. It's as if the cemetery doesn't just memorialize the dead. It overlays the trauma of the field beyond, replaying the agony beneath the surface. Lincoln once spoke of a new birth of freedom, but the ground beneath where he once stood still trembles with the weight of what came before it. The cemetery holds its silence like a shroud, but just beyond its graves, the echoes of grief take on a different shape, smaller, sharper, and far more intimate. The suffering here was created after the gunfire of the war had ceased. The Children's Orphanage, known formerly as the National Homestead at Gettysburg, was founded in 1866 with noble intentions. It rose from the ashes of war with the promise of care, shelter, and healing for the children left behind by the battlefield. But sanctuaries can rot from the inside. Under the control of Rosa Carmichael, a headmistress whose name still kernels the air, the orphanage became a crucible of cruelty. Children were chained in the basement, punished in isolation, and subjected to psychological torment that left scars deeper than any battlefield wound. The basement was Carmichael's domain. Stone walls, iron chains, and a single flickering lantern. Children were dragged below for infractions, whether they were real or imagined. Some were left in isolation for days, and others were shackled to the wall, their cries muffled by thick, damp air. Psychological torment replaced comfort, and fear became routine. The echo of these punishments still cling to the cellar walls like mildew. Today, the building stands as a museum, but the energy inside is anything but archival. Visitors report childlike whispers, soft, fragmented, and close. Cold spots bloom in corners where no draft should reach, and the shadows dart across the floors, low and fast, like something trying not to be seen, or maybe playing hide and seek. The sensation of being watched is constant, especially near the basement stairs. Some feel tugs at their clothes. Others hear chains rattling, faint but unmistakable. The trauma here is layered. Innocence twisted by authority, grief compounded by neglect, and it remembers every punishment, every cry, every silence that followed, and it makes sure that you do too. The orphanage murmurs with echoes of forgotten children, but just beyond its reach, the campus of Gettysburg College holds a different kind of silence, one shaped by intellect, ruptured by war, and haunted by what was never fully buried. Founded in 1832 as Pennsylvania College, the institution was meant to be a place of learning, reflection, and progress. But in July of 1863, the serenity of the grounds was shattered. The Battle of Gettysburg swallowed the campus, and at the center of that upheaval stood Pennsylvania Hall. Penn Hall, built in 1837, is the oldest building on campus. Its brick facade and classic symmetry suggest permanence, tradition, and safety. But on July 1st, Union forces commandeered the structure and transformed it into something far more desperate: a field hospital and a morgue. The classrooms were cleared, the stairwells became surgical stations, and the hallways filled with the wounded, the dying, and the already dead. Soldiers from both sides were dragged inside. Their uniforms would be soaked in blood and their bodies broken. Surgeons would work without pause, without anesthetic, without enough light. Amputations were performed on the floor, the screams echoing through the corridors. Blood pooled in the corners. The smell of iron and rot clung to the walls. Penn Hall became a crucible of agony, its academic purpose drowned beneath the weight of the battlefield horrors. This building, once a symbol of learning, had become a basin of suffering, and sometimes it opens a door to something that shouldn't be there. Late one evening, two college administrators stepped into the elevator, headed into the basement after hours, something that was routine and quiet. The building was empty, but when the doors slid open, they didn't find the concrete floors and storage rooms. What they found instead was blood. The basement had transformed. The walls were smeared with crimson. The air reeked of iron and sweat. Doctors in 19th century uniforms moved with grim urgency, their sleeves rolled and their aprons soaked. Wounded soldiers laid on stretchers, moaning and praying, screaming. Surgical commands echoed through the space. "Hold him down, more chloroform, we're losing him." The administrators stood frozen, watching the scene that shouldn't be possible, and then in an instant, it vanished. The lights flickered, the sounds stopped, and the basement was empty. There were no stretchers, no blood, just silence and concrete. They didn't speak for a long time, but they didn't need to. This story has been corroborated by multiple witnesses over the years, faculty, staff, and even students. The elevator itself is said to malfunction frequently, stopping at the basement unprompted, and its doors open to nothing. Or, sometimes, to something else. Across campus, Stevens Hall carries its own weight. It's quieter and subtler, but no less unsettling. The building hums with a different kind of energy, one that slips between the walls and settles near the stairwells. Students report disembodied voices, fragments of conversation, laughter that doesn't belong, whispers that rise and fall without sources, cold spots that bloom from empty corridors, and lights that flicker, shadows stretching across the ceiling and then vanishing before they can be named. Also on campus is Huber Hall, which carries its own spectral rhythm, less theatrical than Penn Hall, but not less tenacious. Footsteps echo through the empty corridors that are steady and deliberate, almost as if someone is patrolling a perimeter that no longer exists. These steps don't rush, and they don't wander. They follow a very methodical pattern. Doors will slam without warning. It's not a creak. It's not a soft close. It is a slam, the kind of sound that makes you stop mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-breath. There's no wind. There's no draft. It's always just impact. Near the entrance, a male apparition has been seen pacing. He wears a uniform, Union by most accounts. His posture is rigid and his gaze is fixed upon something unseen. He never acknowledges anyone nearby. He simply walks as if waiting for orders that never come. Sometimes people say that he is a remnant of a hospital overflow, a soldier who never made it to Penn Hall. Others believe that he's guarding something or someone long gone. Schmucker Hall rises from Seminary Ridge like a sentinel. Built in 1832 as part of the Lutheran Theological Seminary, it was never meant to be a battlefield outpost. But on July 1st, 1863, it became one. Union forces used its upper floors as a lookout, scanning the horizon for advanced Confederate troops. What they saw from those windows was chaos, lines breaking, men falling, the town below swallowed in smoke and screams. And then the wounded came. Schmucker Hall was converted into a field hospital, its classrooms cleared and its chapels repurposed as soldiers were dragged inside, both Union and Confederate alike. They were bleeding, broken, and begging. Surgeons operated on every available space. The floors ran red. The walls absorbed the cries, and the windows, once used to observe, became frames for horror. From above, soldiers watched comrades die in the fields below, powerless to help. The building didn't just witness trauma, it became a part of it. Today, Schmucker Hall stands restored. Its interior pristine, its purpose returned to theological study. But the past hasn't left. Visitors report apparitions in uniform pacing the upper floors, gazing out the window as if still searching for movement in the trees. There are disembodied cries that echo through empty rooms, prayers, surgical commands, the soft moan of someone slipping away. Some speak of time slips, moments when the landscape outside shifts. The cars will vanish and instead cannon smoke rolls in and the ridge becomes a battlefield once more. Schmucker Hall doesn't haunt with spectacle. It haunts with memory, with the weight of observation and the agony of helplessness. It watched the war unfold, and even today, it still does. There are even more locations, and each one doesn't simply house ghosts. They carry their own conditions and states of being that exist beyond time and intention. Some are residual, playing back moments like a looped reel of agony. The surgical ward in Penn Hall, the marching footsteps in the cemetery, the cries that ride from Smucker's Hall on the upper floor. These are hauntings without awareness, echoes of trauma so deeply embedded into the architecture that they replay without deviation. They don't respond, they don't change. They exist as memory made audible, visible, and tactile. Others are intelligent. They move with purpose and interact. Rachel the nurse is not a fragment, she is a presence. She opens drawers, rearranges belongings, and walks the halls as if her shift never ended. The children in the orphanage don't simply echo, they reach. They respond to visitors, tug at their clothes, whisper from corners. These hauntings are not passive, they're unfinished. They seek recognition and resolution and, perhaps, just acknowledgement that they were once here. The difference between witnessing and suffering is not always clear in these spaces. Smucker Hall was a watchtower before it became a hospital. Soldiers stood on its upper floors and saw the battle unfold below, unable to intervene. That helplessness left a mark. Penn Hall, by contrast, absorbed the full weight of suffering. Blood on the floors, screams in the stairwell, limbs stacked on the walls outside. One structure observed, the other endured, and both remained intact, but the energy that they carry is shaped by what they were forced to hold. Memory itself becomes a haunting. Not just the memory of events, but the emotional residue they left behind. The cemetery is quiet, but the grief there is not still. It rises in waves, especially near the graves of the unknown soldiers. Visitors report sudden sadness, confusion, longing, feelings that don't belong to them but arrive nonetheless. These are not hauntings in the traditional sense. They are grief loops, emotional imprints that replay in the presence of living. The air shifts, the temperature drops, and the past presses in. Gettysburg hauntings are so much more than ghost stories. They are layered expressions of trauma. They exist as part of a larger system of memory, ones that continue to unfold and respond. The transitions between them are not marked by chronology or geography, but by the way each space holds what it was never meant to contain. The stories don't end here. They remain in motion. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain spoke these words once. In great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and pass. Bodies disappear, but spirits linger to consecrate ground for the vision place of souls. He said this on October 3rd, 1889, during the dedication of the Marine monuments at Gettysburg. The ceremony marked the placement of monuments honoring the 20th Marine Infantry Regiment and other Marine units that had fought in the battle. Chamberlain, who had commanded the 20th Marine at Little Round Top, was not just a speaker that day. He was a survivor, a man still carrying the emotional weight of what he had seen and endured. He stood on the same ground where 26 years earlier, his regiment had held the far left flank of the Union line against repeated Confederate assaults. The defense at Little Round Top became one of the most celebrated actions of the battle, and Chamberlain's leadership was later recognized with the Medal of Honor. But his speech wasn't about heroism. It was about presence, about the way the land had changed, not just physically, but spiritually. He was articulating something that went beyond military memory. He was acknowledging that Gettysburg had become a place where the emotional residue of sacrifice remained active. The spirits he spoke of were not abstractions. They were the men he had fought beside, the ones who had died, the ones who had watched others die. He believed the ground itself had been transformed by their presence. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there is something at Gettysburg that cannot be denied. It moves through the halls, across the fields, and beneath the stone. It's not theatrical. It's not imagined. It's felt. The air carries weight. The buildings respond. The ground doesn't forget. This is no longer a battlefield for the living, but remains active in ways that defies explanation. The grief here is not historical, it's present. It loops, it lingers, it waits. You don't need to see an apparition to feel it. You don't need to hear a voice to know you've been spoken to. Gettysburg doesn't ask for belief. It asks for attention and stillness, for acknowledgement. Stories here are not confined to the past. They continue in silence and memory, in the architecture of suffering and survival. And once you've walked its corridors, once you've stood in its quiet, you carry it with you. For those who wander and know what it's meant to be followed, until next time, I'm Amanda Joy signing off.
Are you fascinated by the strange and mysterious in our world? Do you find yourself drawn to odd and unusual events or peculiar historical moments that aren't talked about in the history books?
Do you feel as though you have a connection to forces or specters unseen, or that you're not entirely alone in the woods when you go for a hike? Do you think there could be something more out there?
Well, strangers, do we have the podcast for you? I'm Christiana.
And I'm Bree.
Welcome to Something Strange, a podcast covering strange stories ranging from the supernatural, the paranormal, weird history, folklore, and more.
From cryptids to real-life historical figures, from hauntings to peculiar happenings, there's a story here for you. Tune on in the first and third Fridays of each month for our main episodes. But if you can't get enough, check out our mini episodes on the fourth Fridays of each month.
We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube. And for even more strange content, check us out on our socials, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok.
For now, strangers, it's time for us to part ways.
Remember to tune on in.
We'll be right here with
Something Strange.